Hi, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM News Talk Radio. Well, we're all at home. We're all supposed to stay home, and hopefully we all will stay home this weekend. It's supposed to be nice weather. But whether you're inside or in the backyard or whatnot, I thought one of the things that would be really good is to check in with my brother Dave, who runs a bookstore, and say, well, what book should we be reading? It's one of those times that we can be reading books. Too often in life, we just don't have the time to catch up with whatever the bestsellers are or some old favorites or whatnot. So David Crombie, who is in Mulhust Bay and runs the Mulhust Bay Book and Gift Store, is going to join us and tell us what books we should be reading. Hi, Dave. How you doing?
Doing well, Brian. We should mention that Mulhust Bay is in Alberta, about an hour southwest of Edmonton. And, I can only talk about, books that I'm familiar with and that I enjoy. So, that kind of limits us. And today I'm going to be talking about popular literature, particularly, because that's sort of the entry place for people who don't read a lot of fiction or are getting back into reading. But we'll start with some nonfiction, and then move into fiction, and then into mystery, which is sort of my favorite genre.
Fantastic! I'm looking forward to it. So, what nonfiction would you be recommending to us?
Well, this is a fairly serious book. John Ralston Saul, the husband of the former Governor General. I mean, he's written several books, but this Voltaire's Bastards, it was probably the late 70s or early 80s that he wrote it. And so many nonfiction books, particularly with political comment, quickly become dated. They become not so relevant. But this is, I think, still quite relevant. He weaves together biography, history, and philosophy. Let me just read a sentence or two. In the book, he really picks on Robert McNamara as sort of as Voltaire's bastard, kind of devoted to reason, even when reason is not reasonable. He says, Robert McNamara is the individual who most dramatically fills the role of the man of reason in flamboyant decline. He's a fascinating writer. He talks about how McNamara brought sort of a business culture to the military, and his own idea of rationalism. And he says, in the process, everyone mislaid the basic given of membership in an officer corps, that each individual, in order to do his duty, is prepared to do the unacceptable, that is, to die. Getting killed, after all, is not logical, rational, efficient, or what a businessman would perceive as being in his personal self-interest. Well, a fascinating book.
Well, it's really quite interesting, Dave, because as you probably know, our Uncle Chip thought Robert McNamara was fantastic and heralded him as one of the heroes of the post-war era.
Well, John Ralston Saul, while he appreciates particular things about Robert McNamara's moral character, how he resigned from Johnson's administration when he felt that the president was letting the war get out of control. Nevertheless, he's critical and sympathetic in a way with these bureaucratic creatures that our culture has put forth.
What's the connection with Voltaire?
Well, the age of reason is the 18th century, a person such as Voltaire, or think of the neoclassical architecture, say, of a Robert Adam in Scotland, or, ending up, sorry to mention this guy again, but with Schleiermacher and the founding of the University of Berlin right around 1800, I think it was. Then after that, you had the Romantic Age, the 19th century, where there was, of course, Nietzsche and Hegel and an emphasis on the will and on feeling. You know, Schleiermacher, I guess, is a bridge character because he brings in feeling as well. So there was a sense that that Voltaire and his contemporaries, needed a corrective, and the 19th century was in some case a response to that. But it's not just a reaction to it; it also incorporated. I mean, the gains of the Age of Reason were not lost.
Well, it's kind of ironic today because for the first time, you have politicians north and south of the border actually listening to scientists. So are we in an age of reason now, listening to Tony Fauci and the public health people in Canada? Or do we have the people that say, oh, we don't care about that, we want to reopen the economy, and are the people that are the emotional and maybe not listening to scientists?
Yeah, well, when I hear on TV the various health officers for the various jurisdictions, clearly these people have compassion. So there's more than reason going on. But let's us go on, Brian, because I don't want to get stuck with this one book.
We're going to take a break for messages and come back more with David Crombie and books you should be reading this weekend in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, welcome back. Good evening. We're on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. It's Friday night, and we're talking about books that you should be thinking about reading for the weekend. And I'm joined by my brother, David Crombie, who is the proud owner of Mulhust Bay Books and Gifts.
Co-owner, Brian. Co-owner.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Sorry about that. And he's just talked us through Voltaire's Bastards, a book by John Ralston Saul. And now, Dave, what's the next book you're going to be recommending?
Who I Am by Pete Townsend. Music biographies are quite popular. And if people who maybe haven't been reading a lot, if they have a favorite musician they're interested in, that too is an entree into reading. He was like Patti Smith, another musician I want to mention briefly. He also had very much an artistic kind of side, and so he writes well, as does Patti Smith. Of course, The Who, and I saw them at the Montreal Forum back in 1968, I think it was.
You're kidding. Did you really?
Yes. Yeah, I went with my buddy Kyoka. We saw The Who and the Drugs.
And you didn't take me? Why didn't you take me?
Of course, they were at Woodstock, which was, sort of made them or elevated them even higher in rock history. By the time we hit I'm Free, most of the audience was on its feet. Before I knew it, Roger was singing See Me, Feel Me, Touch Me, Heal Me to waves of young people who suddenly realized that Tommy was music unwittingly destined for precisely this kind of festival. Well, I'll leave the rest, but there's lots of good music biographies. Phil Collins, Ian Tyson has The Long Road Home or something like that.
Now, several of them recently have been turned into movies. Have you watched any of these movies on Elton John
Sure.
or Queen?
I haven't seen the one on Queen. I should do, but we do have the book. I think it's entitled Me or something like that by Elton John. I do want to bring up Patti Smith. This is a biography about her, but much better is the book that she wrote, Just Kids. Remember that, Just Kids, a book about her time with Robert Mapplethorpe in Greenwich Village in the early days, just when punk music was coming out, and how they kind of survived hand to mouth. A great story.
Tell me a little bit about Patti Smith, if you could.
She was many different things. She was an artist. I think she was a Vogue model. Certainly in her time in Manhattan in those days, she had a great eye for things of value. She would go to thrift shops and buy collector items that I probably the shop owner didn't know the true value of, but she would have a buyer in mind, and and find that and bring that to that person, and that's how they survived. You know, that's interesting to me as a person who collects used books and then sells them. You know, I mean, it's one thing to find out that a book has a particular value, but it's another to find you know, people who have a passion for that particular writer, that particular genre.
Excellent.
So just quickly, because I want to get on to fiction and mystery, Chantal Hébert, we always like her on CBC. This is The Morning After. She also has a French Kiss about Stephen Harper's love affair with Quebec.
What's The Morning After?
And always fun for nonfiction is Bill.
Hold it. Go back. Chantal Hébert, The Morning After. What's it about?
Her thesis is that nobody really thought through what would happen if the Quebec referendum, the most recent one, went the other way. Not the sovereigntists nor the federalists had really thought through. And she gets into some of the you know, some of the conflicts within the sovereignist camp between Dumont and Parizeau, and she has this notion that Parizeau imagined that English Canada would you know, come into negotiations in a business-like fashion without any hurt or emotion, and it would go very, very simply. And of course, you know, Chantal is quite critical of that particular attitude. Now, it's been a while since I've read that book, so don't ask me anymore, please.
Sounds like a very similar attitude, though, to Kevin Johnston, the Prime Minister of the UK, and what he thought the European Commission would say to Brexit.
Right. So interesting that a historical book about events 20 years and more in the past, history is repeating itself, Brian.
What's the line about people that don't remember history are bound to repeat it?
Right. Now, can I mention Bill Bryson?
For sure.
And you know, some of these too, I want to mention, I'll be talking about several authors of which they've made movies of their books or TV programs. And it's always fun both to read the book and to see the program. You know, particularly through this time, we're watching a lot of Netflix.
Bill Bryson, A Walk in the Woods.
Right, his journey. Now, he didn't complete the whole thing, but he did segments on the Appalachian Trail.
Okay.
So you and I probably went on the Greene, the long trail in Vermont a little bit through the Green Mountains.
Where is the
But his most interesting book, to my mind, is A Summer in America, 1927, where he ties together Lindbergh crossing the Atlantic by plane, and you know, the competition between Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig for the home run hero of the year, and other events that happened in America, and he makes that history really come alive.
Awesome.
Let's get on to fiction.
Okay.
Now, we always encourage people who are getting back into reading to read Janet Evanovich or Lee Child.
Repeat those names again, please.
Janet Evanovich, her Stephanie Plum series. Stephanie's sort of vulnerable, sometimes not very competent bounty hunter in Trenton, New Jersey. And Evanovich really has a lot of humor in her books, and that humor comes out of Stephanie's relationship with a cast of characters, her grandmother, a colleague who used to be a whore, and you know, some of the boyfriends and the boyfriend's dog, and all that kind of thing. And it's up to about 25 in the series now. You know, humor helps create interest, especially for people who you know, are getting back into reading.
What age would this be appropriate for, and what gender?
You know, both men and women read Janet Evanovich. I mean, you think female author, there's probably a little bit of romantic suspense. You'd think it would be more a female audience, but I certainly know male people who do read the series and enjoy it.
What age?
Oh, I don't think, you know, I mean, it's fiction. It's not young adult. So 20 and over, I'd say.
Okay. What's next?
Lead child. You've probably seen the Jack Reacher movies. Everybody complained that Tom Cruise had the lead character, which doesn't make sense because Cruise is short and Jack Reacher's supposed to be 6'6" or something like that. But he gets off a bus. He doesn't have any kind of a home. He gets interested in some shady goings on, and he gets involved. Lee Child said that he never plans his books, and so he's in the same kind of situation that the reader is, just wondering and waiting and expectant about what's going to happen next. So that's one of the reasons why this series, I think, really works.
And once again, what gender, what age, and where's the author from?
You know, Lee Child's a British author, but they're all set in the United States. One of the recent ones, I think, was set in New Hampshire. Past tense was set in New Hampshire. There was a Canadian couple at a motel, a couple from New Brunswick. So a little bit of a Canadian angle there. Let me go on to Mark Greene, who's wrong. Mark Greene. There we go. Another thriller, roller coaster ride, and his character, the Gray Man, super competent, but not just sort of two-dimensional. I mean, he's interesting, and the settings, and I think setting is important in fiction. He's bringing his mayhem to Mexico, to Vietnam, all over the place. So that brings interest as well.
Okay.
Another humor type fiction is Stephen Clark, and he basically leans on the idiosyncrasies and misunderstandings between Brits and French.
What's the name of the book?
This one is Dial M for Merde, and there's other books with the word merde in them. So,
and it's the friction between Brits and French, or what?
Right. Here we have a Brit who's kind of touring America with his French lover, sometime lover, and they just have different personalities going in different directions. So it's fun.
Fun. Excellent. Sounds interesting.
Okay. Do we have time to get on to mystery?
We do, but we should take a break then for a message and do mystery coming up in a second. So this is fascinating, Dave. If people are interested in your books and they want to order them online, can they do that?
They can at mulhustbaybooks.com.
How do you spell Mulhust Bay, please?
MULHURSTBAY.com. And then it's books.
Mulhust Bay Books.com. And then you'll ship it out to anywhere in Canada?
Indeed.
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Dave Crombie on books you should be thinking about reading while we're all physically distancing this weekend and or maybe for the next couple of weeks. Stay with us. Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. We're chatting with my brother, David Crombie, who is the co-owner, I was corrected earlier, of Mulhust Bay Books and Gifts, which is in Mulhust Bay. And he's got a website, mulhustbaybooks.com, and he will ship you an interesting book anywhere in Canada you want to get. And he's got a website where you can order those books. And he's just taken us through nonfiction and fiction, and now he's eager to take us through his favorite genre, which is mysteries. Over to you, Dave.
Right. Thanks, Brian. Just a few months ago, when I was in Toronto, I had the chance to go to the Sleuth of Baker Street, a fabulous a mystery-only store. It used to be, I think, on Bayview, and is now just sort of across the river from East York. But mystery in our store has its own section apart from fiction. And we've further subdivided into cozies, which always involve sort of a village kind of situation and are usually not very dark. There's historical mysteries, and then there's everything else, which is, we'll call noir, which means that it tends to be bleak and involve murder and death and that kind of thing. A good example of the cozy mysteries are MC Beaton, her two series. One is Hamish Macbeth, set in the Highlands of Scotland, and Agatha Raisin, set in the Cotswolds. Both of those series have become televised programs that you can access on Acorn TV. They're quite good.
What's the name of the author again?
MC Beaton.
And she's a Brit.
I'm probably Scottish.
Yeah.
Thinking that even the one set in the Cotswolds, the hero is Scottish.
Okay, and you've read some of them?
I have not. I just watch them on TV.
But
I'm really much of a cozy person.
But you recommend them?
Yes, sure. And I sell them, yeah.
Okay.
Here's Ellis Peters, the Cadfael series, a great historical series, also, of course, on television. I have read one or two of these.
And what's the name of the book?
This one is The Summer of the Danes.
Okay.
There's other historical series. I know Peter Tremaine, his Sister Fidelma series. I mean, it's interesting how often these series employ monastic figures. I think that's about that for cozies.
And again, I apologize. What does cozies refer to?
Cozies is a style of mystery, usually not involving if it involves a police person at all, it'll be a rural village kind of policeman. But often it involves it could involve baking. Sometimes there's even recipes in cozy mysteries. It could involve often dogs and cats. Needlework. That's the kind of thing that ends up in cozies. And
cozies is because it's something to do with a village and something you can cozy up to?
I think that's exactly the point.
Okay.
I mean, some would even put Agatha Christie in that category. I'm not sure I would. But a village setting is is typical, and then there's a cast of characters usually that that again make you feel like you're with a familiar crowd. So it's
awesome.
Cozy in that sense.
Okay, what's the next genre?
Well, I mentioned historical. We've already gone through the Cadfael series. Let me move to a Canadian angle, if I can.
Okay.
A Canadian press, that's House of Anansi publishing house, have a great mystery imprint. Spiderline is the imprint, if you can see it.
Yep.
And Ian Hamilton, I believe he's a Canadian author, and his character is a forensic accountant of Chinese descent, and and so that's kind of interesting. That particular imprint involves international authors as well. Everything I've read from Spiderline has grabbed me. This is an Elena Forbes her book, Evil in Return. And her books tend to be set in the UK. Other good Canadian works, we've got Peggy Blair. I believe she's a lawyer, or was a lawyer in Ottawa. And her hero is an Afro-Cuban detective. And he somehow visualizes the deceased in his vehicle. They can't speak to him or give him hints about how they got murdered, but somehow the dialogue helps move him forward in his investigations. But that's interesting, I think, for particularly people who are familiar with Cuba. Janice Macdonald is an Edmonton author. Her hero, female Randy Craig, is an academic wannabe, who I guess gets positions with the University of Alberta, probably a sessional lecturer, that kind of thing.
Right.
This is an early one of her books, but Edmontonians will be familiar with the Fringe, the Folk Festival, Rutherford House, and her books will revolve around those familiar events.
And this one's called The Monitor?
The Monitor. I think it has to do with, well, it was a long time since I read it, but kind of supervising exams and that kind of thing.
Okay.
I hope that's right.
An academic wannabe. Sounds familiar, frankly. The
most appreciated Canadian mystery writer right now is Louise Penny.
Okay. The beautiful mystery.
A lot of her books, and her books feature Armand Gamache. He's a police person, eventually chief of police with the Sûreté de Quebec. And a lot are set in a traditionally Anglo village in the Eastern Townships. And so some of the tension between French and English comes out. Again, you have some of that cozy atmosphere with the village called Three Pines, and a poet and an artist, and a gay French couple who run a bistro, an African Canadian from Haiti, I think, who has the local library. And yet some of the books of hers that I really appreciate happen for me when Gamache leaves Three Pines and he goes to Quebec City, or he goes to, this one is a monastery up the St. Maurice River, or one of the books takes him down to the lower St. Lawrence. But a much appreciated, and we sell a lot of her here in Mulhust Bay, even though not too many people around here are that familiar with Quebec or the Eastern Townships.
Our mother is a big fan of that author and has recommended some of her books to me on several occasions.
Right.
And she loves to tell me that the location that they're set in is actually somewhere where we used to go for summers, and you and I went to summer camp.
Right.
Is that true?
Yeah. Three Pines. It could be Georgeville. It could be Knowlton. I don't know. It's. But the Eastern Townships really do come alive. But also of interest is her portrayal of Gamache, the main character. He's kind. And maybe it takes a female author to paint a male figure that way. He's not just intelligent and brave and all that, but he's actually kind. So interesting.
What's the name of the author again, please?
Louise Penny.
Louise Penny. Okay, what's next?
I've got two Scottish authors here, Peter May and Denise Mina. There was a whole sort of movement in Scotland, and Ian Rankin was a well-known representative. They called it tartan noir. Noir because it had some of the bleakness of the Glasgow slums or the tough parts of Edinburgh. And you know, I know one of Denise Mina's books begins with trash floating down in the wind down the street. So it's noir.
Peter May,
you know,
Blowback, and what's the other one?
The Field of Blood. This is one of Denise Mina's books. She's a Glaswegian writer that actually has been made into a movie that you can find on Acorn TV, if you have it.
Awesome.
Peter May has got several series. I know he's got a series set in China. His Enzo MacLeod series is set in France with a forensic expert who is half Italian and half Scottish, and probably in his late 50s, early 60s. Both of these writers give effort to description. I find with Peter May, you know, I can be reading it like I'd be really reading a thriller, and then I'll say to myself, wait a second, there's interesting description here. You know, that's not just for show. I mean, it does kind of connect with the plot. So that's something I appreciate about these two writers, or say an Anne Cleves, who has the Vera series and the Shetland series, and Louise Penny as well.
Dave, we're going to take another break for messages and come back in just a minute with a couple of final books. Stay with us.
Sounds good. Something nice.
We're back with Dave Crombie, the co-owner of Mulhust Bay Books and Gifts, a local bookseller. And one of the reasons why I wanted to feature Dave today was, number one, because I think a lot of us are staying at home this weekend, and frankly, maybe for the next couple of weeks. And not watching TV all the time is probably something we should be doing. And curling up with a book in your favorite couch or favorite chair is something that I highly recommend. And the other thing is, I think a lot of small and medium-sized businesses are probably hurting across Canada. And so therefore, to the extent that we can order some of the things, whether it's takeout food or books or gifts or whatnot online, and keep their businesses operating, is probably something that we should be thinking about doing. So Dave, I think you've got one or two final books for us.
Sure, I should mention, Brian, that we are doing free delivery to Leduc and Wetaskiwin, but that's probably not helpful to your listening audience.
But you'll deliver to Toronto and charge us the postage.
Indeed.
Fantastic.
Mystery has become, of course, it's an international enterprise, and I think people in this part of the world became aware of particularly the Scandinavian writers with Stieg Larsson and his Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series. I want to mention, Fred Vargas. Of course, we're reading this in translation. In spite of the name, she's actually a French historian, female, I think archaeologist type person. But a very interesting series. Every character, including the lead detective, are represent part of the personality. I know her main character. He kind of wanders around, goes for a walk, and eventually clues pop into his mind. So, and often they involve her books involve an element of history. You know, town criers in Brittany. Or the plague and that kind of thing. This one actually is set around Ottawa, so that's fascinating. I mean, a French writer who focuses usually on France has her detective come over to Canada for a conference, and of course bad things happen.
Awesome.
UC Adler Olsen, a Danish writer, and so, you know, we read them in translation. It's a Detective Mork, I believe is the name. It's a cold case kind of division. They got a budget, but the establishment didn't really want them to have any visibility, so stuck them in the basement. And his colleague ends up being a Syrian immigrant whose name is Hafez Assad. So there's who's always doing sort of jokes about donkeys. Anyway, so there's humor, but these are plenty dark, good Scandinavian noir.
Awesome.
I think that's all I have to bring to you. I'll just mention this one because I'm reading it now. Greg Isles, the Natchez Burning. That's a series set in Mississippi with a lot of that dark civil rights, Ku Klux Klan era stuff percolating. So that's what I got.
Well, I've got 3 recommendations for you if I could. So
excellent.
This week,
Thomas Piketty.
Beg pardon?
Thomas Piketty.
Yes, probably. What was that? Capital in the 21st Century. Excellent book. Very, very, very thick. Good doorstop. So I've been very impressed with both Andrew Cuomo and Chris Cuomo on TV. And one of the books that I read when I was a teenager that really got me into politics was The Diaries of Mario Cuomo by Mario Cuomo, which was his description of running for governor. And so if you're at all interested in the Cuomo brothers Mario Cuomo, their father, who was governor of New York, and the draft that was put in place to have him run for president at one point in time, similar to, frankly, a lot of people that are talking about Governor Andrew Cuomo, I highly recommend that book. Have you ever read that book, Dave?
I have not, but I would be interested. Does that involve like Tammany Hall and that kind of stuff?
It involves a lot of that, though it's sort of later on than that era, but certainly a lot of how one gets elected in New York State. The other person who I've seen on TV just this week and who I really quite enjoy is Doris Kearns Goodwin. And she wrote the book about Lincoln, Team of Rivals, that ended up being turned into the movie Lincoln. But she also wrote a book called Leadership in Turbulent Times. And she goes through a bunch of different presidents and how they best deal with turbulent times. And if there was a time to read something about leadership in turbulent times, this is probably it. Have you read any of hers?
I have not. I did see the movie Lincoln and enjoyed it.
And then my favorite book of all time, which you probably think is not great, but I loved it, was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
I sell it. I haven't read it.
I highly recommend it.
The Alchemist. He's a Nobel Prize winner, I think. Coelho, Brazilian maybe.
I think Portuguese, but Portuguese. One or the other, and translated into different languages, English, etc., around the world. And The Alchemist is one of my favorite books of his, but he's also written numerous others. And so, any of the Paulo Coelho books, I would highly recommend.
I'm glad you're mentioning a fiction book. That's
good. Well, Dave, again, if people want to order any books from you, how would they do that?
There's just to go to the website, open an account, and click on the books that you desire. And we get that form and do the transaction here with the credit card number.
And the website again is what?
mulhurstbaybooks.com.
And how do you spell Mulhurst?
Mulhurst.
Well, David Crombie, the co-owner of Mulhurst Bay Books and Gifts, and if not from Dave Crombie and Mulhurst Bay, you're your local independent bookstore. Don't go to Amazon. Don't go to Indigo. Go to one of the local small bookstores and take a look at their websites and think about what books you might want to read and order them from them. And similarly, let's go to the local restaurants and order some food from them, and or the local gift store or the local clothing store, and support our small and medium-sized businesses in this time when they need our help as they're struggling through, frankly, the same things, if not the worst things, than when the rest of us are struggling through. So Dave, thanks so much for joining me and chatting with us all about books.
I've enjoyed it, Brian. Take care.
Have a great weekend, and you take care. And call Mom.
Yes. Bye-bye.
That's Brian Crombie on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, chatting about books that you can enjoy this weekend. And we are joined by Dave Crombie of MulhurstBayBooksandGifts.com. Thanks, and see you next week.